I'd like to do here is to illustrate or present to you a philosophy. Philosophy, the definition of philosophy is the search for correct thought. The search for correct thought. Now I'm dealing with the pattern of thought, or the process of thought, not the content of thought, not the little details. That's not what I'm dealing with. I'm dealing with the process of thought. The definition of philosophy is the search for correct thought, the correct process. So, that's what we're dealing with, is the process of thought itself. Now, this philosophy is based on universal law. A universal law is a law that everything in existence must abide by. Everything in existence must abide by this universal law. That's what makes it universal. Everything in existence must abide by this universal law. That's what I'm using for a base. What I'm going to do, I'm going to build a foundation that you can use and build on the rest of your entire existence. And again, this foundation is built, the base of the foundation is this universal law. So that's where we're starting with. Also, this foundation is logically structured to develop a conclusion. When you logically structure anything, logic deals with truths. This is all built on truths. This has nothing to do with opinions. This deals with actual, factual, truthful stuff. It's pulled together to develop a conclusion. Okay, here we go with the base. It's the base of this foundation. Universal law. First of all, this universe is compiled and composed of an infinite number of elements. Little pieces make up this universe. Every one of these individual elements involved in this universal system possesses one particular characteristic that sets it aside from everything else. One thing makes it different. One particular characteristic sets it aside from everything else. It has to. It wouldn't be its own element if it didn't have something that made it different. If it was the same as something else, it wouldn't be its own element. So every element involved in this universal system has one particular characteristic, one difference that sets it aside from everything else. Second part of the universal law, when that individual element is using their particular characteristic, their difference, at its optimum, the best that it can be used, that element is fulfilling its purpose in being. That's why it is here. This is universal law, folks. Everything in existence must abide by this. No court of appeals. Every individual element involved in this universal system possesses one particular characteristic that sets it aside from everything else. When it uses that particular characteristic at its optimum, the best that it can be used, that element is fulfilling its purpose in being. That's why it is here. Universal law. Everything in existence must abide by this rule. Universal law. One more time, I'm going through it. Every individual element involved in this universal system has one difference, one particular characteristic that sets it aside from everything else. When it uses that particular characteristic, or that difference, at its optimum, the best that it can be used, that element is fulfilling its purpose in being. That's why it is here, logically. Okay, now what does that have to do with us? Us as human beings? Well, folks, we are just one element. We're one element involved in this universal system. Therefore, we're subject to this rule and regulation set out by the universal law. We do have one particular characteristic that sets us aside from everything else. Our particular characteristic as human beings, we possess intellect. That's our particular characteristic. Does an animal have intellect? No. Does an ape have intellect? No. That's our particular characteristic. What is intellect? Through the use of intellect, we have the capabilities of creating in our minds what we want to happen out here in the future. We can create in our mind what we want and then develop it out here in the outside physical world. The difference being, an animal or an ape, their entire accumulative consciousness is totally dependent on the outside physical world. What? Your entire cumulative consciousness, their entire cumulative consciousness is dependent on this outside physical world. What I mean by that is when something happens out here in the outside physical world, they react to it. If something happens out here, they react to it. Action out here, reaction up here. Action out here, reaction up here. Their entire cumulative consciousness is dependent on this outside physical world. They are running an outside-in thinking process. Remember what I said about philosophy? It's the search for the correct thought process. And an animal's entire cumulative consciousness is dependent on this outside physical world. Something happens out here, they react to it. It's an outside-in thinking process. Action out here, reaction up here. Outside in. A human being, when they use their particular characteristic, and what I'm doing right there is underlining when. When they use their particular characteristic, creates it up here, then makes it happen out here in the outside physical world. Creates it up here, makes it happen out here. Action up here, reaction out here. Action up here, reaction out here. It's an inside-out thought process. When we use our intellect. When we use our particular characteristic. Now, the second part of the universal law. The second part of the universal law is when that individual element is using their particular characteristic at its optimum, that element is fulfilling its purpose in being. We are one element, human beings. Our particular characteristic is intellect. When we use our particular characteristic at its optimum, we will be fulfilling our purpose in being. Are we using our particular characteristic at its optimum? I've said that 1,000 times and I still can't do it without laughing. No. Not even close. Not even close. We have scientists out here that can calculate the activity of the brain. And these scientists will tell you that you are operating 3 to 4% of your brain. Some of them say 8 to 10. They're both comical because they have no idea what 100 is. They have no idea what 100 is. But the basic idea is you're using a very minimal percentage of your brain. I'm using 3 to 4% because they're closer. We are not even using that. But anyway, 3 to 4%. These same scientists that tell you that we're operating 3 to 4% of our brain will also tell you that your brain was absolutely the best. Your ability to take on information and develop understanding, your ability to freely associate and conceptualize, your ability to basically think was the best that it will ever be. They call it alpha level or some shit. But your brain was absolutely the best that it will ever be when you popped out of that womb. When you popped out of that womb, your brain was absolutely the best that it will ever be, and it goes downhill from that point on to the point of being operating 3 to 4%. Folks, we are going completely backwards. Because when that brain pops out of the womb, it's supposed to be just starting. It's supposed to grow and develop from that point on. That's why I say they have no idea what 100 is. That thing is just starting out. It's supposed to grow and develop, not go downhill to the point of operating 3 to 4%. We're going completely backwards, folks. And there's an exact reasoning behind this. There is an exact reasoning behind this. And this is it.